I'm going to set this up briefly, and then I'm going to, I want to really get into the heart of the conversation. This is intended to be a conversation. We will start the conversation here, but also I've invited our panelists to be in conversation with one another. We also want to be in conversation with you. So as there are questions, we don't need to be too formal here. If you have a question as we're starting to engage, raise your hand. If there's a lot of hands, we want to wait. We'll see how this goes, but we certainly want an opportunity to hear from you too. As David and I were thinking about the flow of these 2 days, we knew that we couldn't be here at the Kraft Center at Columbia University without talking about what it is to be on a campus. And Carrie, who has a long history with Hillel, and you'll hear a little bit more about that, as Carrie and I started talking about what this conversation could be, we realized that there's a particular element of the way that Hillel, and I'm looking at David Kessel too, who has a long history, both running a Hillel and working at Hillel International, that there's an approach that Hillel introduced about 10 years ago in the way that they engage their students. And as I was learning more about it and hearing about it, I said, there's so much that we have to learn to bring this to the JCC movement. That was thought one. Thought two was Sara Klein Wagner joined our board. And when Sara joined our board, I knew that in Louisville that they're an integrated community that also operates Hillel. And then I was thinking about my dear friend and colleague, Orit, also. Orit Lender from Staten Island, runs the Staten Island JCC magnificently. And they also recently took on a responsibility that you're going to hear more about. Very unique to the way that Sara has responsibility. But these are 2 JCCs that have responsibility for operating Hillel, which is, talk about a unique model. And then we were honored to invite Rabbi Danielle Leshaw to join us, who is the campus support director, thank you, at Hillel International, who has responsibility for supporting Hillel professionals in the way that they do their work locally, including this Hillel. So we're going to get a lot of local perspective. We're going to get the Hillel International perspective, but this really is intended to be a conversation of what I hope, not only for our executive colleagues in the room who will think about how this might apply from a professional point of view, but it is the work that we all do as lay leaders. We have talked a lot in these couple of days about what it is to be in relationship. So I also want us thinking about it from a different lens than the obvious one about like bringing this work potentially to JCCs. It's also JCC Association's relationship with JCCs, right? I often say that if we were a community center, our members would be the JCCs at JCC Association, right? So we also have a lot to learn about the insights and the wisdom and the data and the way that you think about this and you train. But we're gonna jump into a conversation. So like lots of ways for us to think about this. But I'm gonna, Danielle, I'm gonna start with you, if that's okay. Just if you could, one, maybe say a little bit more about your role. And if you could talk about Hillel's relationship-based engagement model and the framework and sort of like what it's all about.
Great, thank you. It's terrific to be here. So just quickly, I heard UJ Federation come up just a few minutes ago, and my responsibilities at this point in my career, since moving into New York City just before October 7th, was to assume a relationship with the 11 UJA partner campuses here in the city and also out in Stony Brook, up in Binghamton and in Westchester. And also Hofstra. So I have 11 campuses in my portfolio that I consult very regularly with, and Staten Island is one of them, and so it's great to be in relationship with Orit. But before moving into the city, I was living in Pittsburgh, just not far from the JCC. Everyone in Pittsburgh lives really close to the JCC, and I held a national portfolio of campuses of about 50 to 55 campuses around the country from coast to coast. And Louisville was one of my campuses in my portfolio that I consulted with regularly. And what does it mean to consult from Hillel International with a local campus? It essentially means that you have been in the work long enough, and for me that's 23 years, where I am now like a generalist on almost anything that comes up in a Hillel, right? So if a Hillel needs to rebuild their board of directors, if a Hillel needs to launch a major gifts campaign, if there needs to be a full turnover of staff, if they need to deepen Jewish education and identity building opportunities, if they need to combat BDS and anti-Semitism, essentially I'm sort of the liaison, the address for the staff on those campuses, in addition to making sure that the staff on those campuses are trained properly and are able to drive on the vision and mission of their local Hillel. So that's a little bit about what I do, and then your question about engagement and engagement methodology from a Hillel perspective. It is so incredibly simple when you think about it. It's not complicated at all. Basically, we strive to know every student on campus by name and by story. And that takes a lot of effort. And it takes a lot of different strategy and tactics, and it takes an excellent talent pool to be able to do that well. So engagement methodology involves focusing the staff on individualized relationships with Jewish students on campus and now allies, their friends, and learning about each student in terms of who they are, academically, what their Jewish journey has been, what their passions and vision are for their adulthood, if they're able to articulate it, and also to form connections among students. So we weave webs and we bring students together and we build community. And there's just a lot of ways that we do that, which is a whole other conversation, like what are the tactical implications of trying to reach hundreds, if not thousands of students on the campus with a staff of, depending, possibly half of like a half-time professional, all the way up to staff of say 14 to 17 to 20 members, depending on the type of Hillel and the population that's being served. So that's engagement methodology is, in a nutshell, is learning every student by name and by story, and then, God willing, connecting them to opportunities based on what it is that they are articulating for themselves and for their Jewish journeys.
I love that phrase, by name and by story. I'm going to borrow that.
So I should also say I borrowed it, right? We all borrow everything. And I think the first time we heard it, Carrie, you were probably in the room. We were at WashU in St. Louis, and actually the president of WashU uses that language, and it's always resonated with so many of us. I mean, it's incredibly heartfelt when you think about it.
It speaks volumes. It starts to articulate the values of the organization when that kind of language is being used. Orit, I'll turn to you, and then Sara, if you could each just share with our board the structure, because it's unique, it's different, and you could talk a little bit about both the structure from an organizational standpoint and maybe to dig in a little bit also on what you've seen and the way that your Hillels are operating, certainly post October 7th, but I know, Orit, you have a unique model.
Thanks, Jen. So first of all, it's an honor to be here, especially among this panel. So I'm really honored. Back in 2020, I was named CEO. It was literally March 7th. March 14th was a shutdown, and about 6 months into the role, I received a call from the board president at the time. It was the College of Staten Island, Hillel, saying that if we don't change our model, we will shut down. And that UJA Federation was really pushing for us to innovate and think differently about approaching engagement with young adults. In the middle, we developed a task force made up of both JCC lay leadership and Hillel leadership, and with consultation from Panoramic Strategies. We began a 2.5-year process of exploration and discovery around what does it mean for Staten Island engagement with this age cohort. What's happening at the JCC level. At the time, CSI, the College of Staten Island, Hillel literally had 5 students engaged. So we were basically starting from scratch. And a vision was developed that looked at expanding beyond the College of Staten Island, because we do have a private liberal college, Wagner College on the island that had no Hillel, but had Jewish students, actually had even Israeli students on campus. And how do we approach the fact that many immigrant families on Staten Island, their students were actually going to Baruch and NYU, but living at home, and what was their connectivity to Jewish life? And it was minimal. So after 2.5 years of this visioning, where we landed was a management agreement where I was named CEO of a new nonprofit called Staten Island Hillel. And the management and operations would fold into the responsibility of the JCC. So the staff are hired by the JCC. They participate in internal meetings as other department areas would. However, they are based on campus. So outside of those meetings, they are not within our walls. And we have to be okay with that. We started, it was literally, we hired Rachel, our current director. It was August of 23. We signed the agreement in June. August, Rachel came on board as the director. And October 7th happened. So we have faced many challenges throughout the beginning of this model on campus with the climate. However, we were not going to allow that to stop us from building what we believe to be a strong model that would support young adults on Staten Island and giving them the opportunity to gather, feel empowered, and begin to develop what we believe needed to happen on campus. I can go on, but I would say that it wasn't just the student engagement piece, it was building spaces on both campuses, it was relationships with administration, I mean, all of it. Building a new board structure, governance structure. So in a 1.5 years, I'm proud to say that we have engaged, met with, and know the stories of 300 students, which is tremendous given the fact that we started with 5, and those 5 happen to have graduated after a year. So we're really proud of the work. We have been able to double the budget, and thanks to the support of Hillel International Federation, opening doors to private foundations has been key. And we have been able to now be in a position to be able to have 3 staff, which is huge for an organization that had a part-time.
Thank you. I want to share a little piece. When Orit and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago, one of the things that we were both cautious about was that we're not sitting here advocating. I want to be clear about this. We're not advocating that every JCC should suddenly be running their local Hillel. We have enough. And it's not always appropriate. At the same time, I think it's take the organizational structure out for a minute, or I'm imagining as you're talking about like building out the spaces and building boards and all, it's the work that we do. We know this work. So even if it's not, even if your local JCC isn't running and operating a Hillel, imagine how helpful you might be able to be to those other local organizations based on the area of expertise that we have and what could be helpful there. And as you're going to continue to hear the things that we could be learning from our colleagues at Hillel. So I think we absolutely encourage partnership and relationship, but we're not necessarily encouraging business mergers and acquisitions. It's not our recommendation.
But can I just jump in? Because I would love to, recommend business mergers and acquisitions as necessary. I also think that, Hillels are very expansive. For anybody who's in the greater Metro West of New Jersey area knows that Greater Metro West Federation owns and operates Greater Metro West Hillel, and there's 6 to 7 Hillels under that umbrella. And so what I want to just plant a seed about here is that if there is a Hillel in your region, not just in your backyard, right? Not just in your city, but even a couple of 100 miles away, that there is a remote campus that could use some form of support, and you're hearing and you're sensing that they are not able to stand on their feet the way the Staten Island absolutely could no longer do. It's not a bad idea to think about how you might lend some kind of logistical support. It doesn't have to be as extensive of what Orit has done, which is remarkable, but it can be a model.
Definitely. Mergers and acquisitions light, we'll call it. Sara.
By the way, merger and acquisitions, this is great. Except for 16 years ago when we merged our federation and our JCC together. First, I would just give my gratitude and kol hakavod to everyone who's living in the Hillel space right now. How many people in the room have a child or grandchild on a college campus? Okay, so there are multiple stories and kids at multiple universities and campuses. So I know some of us are living this. I have a junior in college right now as well. What we have found in Louisville, and I'll tell you first, I guess, a little bit about our structure. So we call ourselves an integrated community. I call us a hybrid, which basically means we cover all of Jewish Louisville. I think what Danielle was just talking about and the complement of what we can learn from other movements is probably the most important reflection I have today. Many years ago, I was at a JFNA conference and stayed for an extra day and spent the day with Rabbi Michael Yoram, who used to be at Hillel and is now at JFNA. And if you haven't read his book, he wrote a book that basically describes what Danielle was saying. The origin of coffee dates and whether people knew you represented Hillel at Penn or you were part of the advocates that were kind of ambassadors on the side. It's common sense. We're in the people business, and I love that Hillel has hopefully taught the entire field that it's not about our organizations, it's about the people we serve and the people walking through our doors. They don't care what initials are on the door. They don't care if it says Hillel or Chabad in some cases. They just want to find their people. And our job is to help people find their people. So in Louisville, as I mentioned, we've been merged for 16 years. Prior to our merger, the federation, which I was working at prior to merger, I believe, have overseen Hillel was incorporated into our agency back in 1995. The piece that really works in a city our size is the University of Louisville, which I'm sure you all have heard of because, there's basketball out there occasionally. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. We have 20,000 undergrads on campus. We have 150 Jewish students. There are 5 other local smaller colleges in the area. So add on another 30 to 50 students. Plus graduate students, we're not talking about a huge population. So post October 7th, what happens if you're on a campus like like the University of Louisville that used to be more of a commuter campus and now is becoming a bit more residential. People don't want to share that they're Jewish. They don't want the students did not want to lead with being Jewish. The first day we had a pro-Palestinian march on the U of L campus. It was really our entire staff, part of our team, our JCRC director, our Hillel director, we all went down to campus together in the Hillel building with the students, and I'll tell you about our Hillel space in a moment. 10 kids showed up, 10 students, but it meant the world to them because they didn't know where they should be on campus at that moment. They didn't know what was happening outside. The most important takeaway from me, being again part of this integrated organization, is that the dean of students came to sit with us in the Hillel office because we have that relationship, because we work together. And I think the JCRC part, Brock, you said wherever you are yesterday, the JCCs are, our best JCRC putting our best foot forward. Same thing with Hillel. So I will leave it at that. Oh, I guess I should just add, since I mentioned it, sorry. We do not have a Hillel house for 150 students. There are 30, Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong, about 30 smaller Hillels that are run by federations, and in our case, the JCC. We are housed in an interfaith center. So we have 5 other faith groups that share the space, which truly makes us a multi-pluralistic environment.
Orit can probably talk about that a little bit too in a moment. I'm gonna ask Carrie. Carrie, you have a lot to say on this topic, I'm sure. One, I'm gonna ask that you actually do, even though you're known to this room for all obvious reasons as our Chief Talent Officer, maybe just give a brief overview of your history with Hillel, maybe even with this building. And I'm curious if you can just reflect on how much of what you learned at Hillel has informed the way you approach talent for our movement.
Maybe I'll start with that. When I came into this role, hi everybody, it's fun to be up here. When I came into this role, I said to Joan and Jen at the time, like, it's gonna cost $100 million to do the work that we're talking about. And
She said that and she wasn't smiling.
it's $100 million worth of work. And they're like, what? And I was coming from this foundation that I have, which is that we need to know every single professional and lay leader doing this work, not just our chairs, not just our CEOs and execs, but every single professional. Because that's what I learned at Hillel, that I can't serve you in any way if I don't know who you are and what you need. So has it informed? It is absolutely a core part of who I am. I did JCC work for 9 years before I did Hillel work. So I came in with an understanding of what our work is and what we do. And then I went to Hillel here. I was the program director and then the associate director here for 8 years. We had 5 staff when I started. And as you heard from Stephanie and Brian yesterday, somewhere between 22 and 27 right now doing this work. There's only 1,500 Jewish students on this campus, undergrad. There are grad students too, but grads engage differently than undergrads, as we know. That's what it took to do these kinds of relationships, to know every student's name and story. It's gonna take a lot more staff in order for us to do this. So that's definitely what informs like who I am as a human coming into this work and how I think about our work and our practice. It's interesting because everything that I do is about relationship. In every role that I've had, in any community that I had, regardless of role that I had at the JCCs that I worked at or in the Hillels, it was always about being in deep relationship. You heard that from Brock yesterday. I could not be more excited to have a partner. Jen clearly believes that too, but have a partner that speaks about it in that way, the same way I did. That in order to do this work effectively, we need to be in deep relationship. I knew that before I got to Hillel, but I learned the skills to do it at Hillel. I want to shout out Todd in the room because Todd brought relationship-based engagement to his JCC. He trained his staff and his lay leaders on it, and they are doing it, and they do it every day. And they speak about it as if it's just part of how they do their work. So we know that this can work not just to how we, the association, will engage you, but how your JCCs can engage your staff and your membership, and as lay leaders, how you can engage your peers also. Interestingly enough, when I started JCC Association, it was not the first time that I met Orit. Danielle and I were part of some of those focus groups that helped build this portfolio that Staten Island was going to hold. I actually postponed a meeting with Orit because I had accepted the offer from Joan and couldn't tell her that I was leaving Hillel yet to take this position. So it's just really beautiful for us to be here together, as I was part of Rachel's interview process, and really proud of the work that she does. And one thing to know about Rachel is she's a JCC person too, that her Hillel work was informed by how she grew up in our camps, in our community, in our preschool. So she came into the Hillel being part of the portfolio as if it was part of the JCC, because it's who she was as a professional.
I love that. I want to add to this that it's not just the relationships with the students. And Danielle, you really opened my eyes to something when we were talking about this model, which is that if you know the student's name and you know their story and you start to identify what they need and how they need to be connected and with whom they need to be connected, you better know everybody else in that community too. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's another layer that also translates to.
Sure. I think that one of the things that we also work really hard on with staff teams is helping them identify
Who are the appropriate points of contact in the local community and on campus, but also in the partner agencies and foundations. So, we're here in Columbia, so we'll just take this as, the staff team here as an example. This staff team is incredibly sophisticated. It's one of the best in the country. And what they'll do is they'll sit down together, the senior leadership team here, and they'll actually go through campus administrators, faculty members, point people at UJA, point people at the different, foundations that are supporting the work here in the city, the major family foundations, JFNA, JCRC. I mean, the list is very, very long, AJC, right? Really long list. Who's running points? And what does running point even look like? And what's the timeline for it, right? So there are actually like strategy documents where people are saying, okay, I am the program associate responsible for engaging graduate students. These are the top 15 adults that I need to get to know this semester to advance my work and to make sure that my students that I'm engaging with are well connected and have the resources that they need in the event that they can't find them themselves. And so that involves possibly getting to know the head of psychological and counseling services on campus. It involves getting to know local clergy in the events that people are involved in interfaith relationships and want to be connected in that way. It involves getting to know the chair of the Jewish Studies Department and the Israel Studies Department to ensure that there are, salons happening with graduate students and faculty members. So there are, in addition to the work of getting to know the students, there is the heavy lift and labor of making sure that the staff members are really deeply engaged with the adults in the space.
Right, it's just another invitation, I think, for all of us to think about, again, if you're in community local to a Hillel, even not immediate proximity, but make sure you're known to them. Opportunities for employment, summer employment, I'm thinking about our camps, I'm thinking about those relationships, I'm thinking about internships and job opportunities throughout the year. There's lots of ways that I think we can be supportive in making sure, even if they're not reaching out yet to us at JCCs, that we're also reaching out to them.
Yeah, I would just add that I think one of the key pieces was my relationship with administration. So though it began through the task force process of engaging both college presidents, I till today meet with each of them at least once a month as a touch point. And I say particularly post October 7th, that's what saved us. I was able to, when encampments were beginning, not only my relationship, again, JCCs are connected to community at large, whether that's other nonprofit, elected officials, etc. But I was able to, when the encampments were starting in Columbia, to get on a conference call, it was literally 8 o'clock at night, with President Lynch of the College of Staten Island and elected officials, because they started to call saying what's gonna happen here. And be able to have the policies of CUNY to lean on to say, wait a second, encampments, that's not allowed. So if I didn't have that relationship, if I didn't have constant communication with the president, I don't know how quickly we would have been able to shut down the encampments at the College of Staten Island. I'll say this, even I think I shared with you last week, we had a big win on Wagner campus. When we were given identified space to hold Hillel, to renovate, to change into becoming the Hillel space, it was also in a multicultural building. And they put us right next door to the Muslim Association. And when we walked into the space, the first thing we see is the Free Palestine, BDS, right on the door. And I was like, okay, how are we gonna make this a welcoming space for Jewish students when that is the first thing you see? So as we began to have conversations with administration and began to renovate the Hillel space, and there is like a lounge in between the two doors, but they're really close in proximity. We had conversation with administration as to what is the overall goal here for Wagner. If it's to create community where we're opening dialogue, what kind of message are we sending to students when things like that are allowed to be on the front of a door? And so last week, we were able to get a policy change on the campus where you can now no longer have anything hanging on the door except the name of your organization or your club. So for us, that was a big win, because now we're creating a space in this one multicultural spiritual building that Hillel students can come in and have the respect and not feel threatened by what's being put on the front door of another club's space.
I want to give you a lot of credit that you're not giving yourself, though, because I think you did it not by force and not by fight, but you led by example. You explained to administrators your commitment to creating a space inside the room that was welcoming, and that you were hoping that others might do the same to honor what's happening inside the room, not outside the door. So I think that was a leaders by example, and I think it matters a great deal. Sara, you asked a question before to the room about how many people, a lot of hands went up, how many people currently have a student or a child or a grandchild on a college campus. I know I'm not the only one in this room who has a senior in high school. Those hands can go up too. Those of us that are wringing our hands and worrying or not even yet high school students, we're thinking a lot about what's coming. So I want to turn the conversation just a little bit. Anybody can answer this. It's not just for one of you. We're talking a lot about the role that JCCs can play in helping to prepare students, Jewish students in particular, for life on campus. I want to expand it to also parents. So JCCs have wonderful relationships with parents. We go back to early childhood and infant care, and we're trusted. I think there's a role here for us to play. I think some JCCs are already obviously beginning to do this, but what are you seeing from a campus point of view, or those with obviously JCC perspective? Just what can we be doing to prepare students, parents, because their engagement is different?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. I do think that we are missing some really important opportunities to engage high school juniors and seniors and their parents and even their siblings in conversations about what Jewish life on campus
looks like, how students can contribute to Jewish life on campus, how parents can contribute and how they shouldn't contribute. And using the Hillel staff in your area as experts in the conversation, coming up with a 4, 5, 6-part series where parents are coming to the JCC or going to the Hillel building locally and, having a meal together and engaging in a structured conversation about what to expect and what opportunities exist and how to advocate and how to do the work that unfortunately every Jewish student and every Jewish family has to do at this point moving forward since October 7th. God willing, it will slow down, it will, we will cycle out of this, but right now, the reality is that most Jewish students do have some labor here when they step onto campus. And what we don't want them to do, and this would be part of a conversation, we don't want them to erase themselves, right? We don't want them to decide that the work is so hard that they can't do it. So, we've got to get them at the junior level and the senior level and make sure that they're showing up able to be strong and resilient while not also just deciding that they're gonna pretend and be invisible that they're not Jewish.
Sorry, I just wanted to
Sorry,
add.
I cried a lot.
So do I, it's good company.
It's a big topic. I was just thinking back to earlier this year, we hosted, before school started, a program with our JCC with some upperclassmen meeting with incoming freshmen that were leaving for college this year, and then a follow-up with their parents. And then I'm thinking back to programs that we did when I first started early in my career as a JCC professional, taking upcoming seniors or juniors in high school to visit different college campuses when I was working at the Boston JCC. And there's something that's just cumulative, and we know that it's part of our work, but we've kind of got in that rut of, again, I have 3 children and my youngest is in college, so I know the drill. Your kids are applying for colleges, they're working on their resumes, they're worried about what they're doing for the summer. And we took the Jewish part of, not for granted, but we have the Hillel.org to tell us how many students are in every campus. And we hope that our students will choose one of these campuses where they'll feel most comfortable. But what is our responsibility? At the GA a couple months ago, I think it was Rachel Fish that I heard on a panel talking about Jewish education and when do we provide Israel education, when we talk about religious school and Sunday school and B'nai Mitzvah training, that sometimes we wait until they're juniors in high school and we say, let's start teaching these students about Israel now. And she makes the point that that's advocacy at that point. That's not the basics about Israel. So starting with the youngest parents and the youngest students in our ELCs, maybe that's the place to begin.
I would just add, after October 7th, Staten Island faced, and again, we're known as like the forgotten borough, the red borough. We faced unusual rise of Jewish hatred. The JCC is kind of positioned in the middle of the island with a high school right next door. That high school over the course of the last year did 3 protests outside of the JCC because we operate free after school programs in that high school. They wanted divestment from the JCC. We had no choice but to pull into fast gear. We operate 4 Jewish clubs in 4 different public high schools. We called parent meetings because the phone calls were nonstop about harassment in the hallways of the high schools. We mobilized JCRC, ADL, AJC, you name it, to begin to put in place some workshops for both parents and high school students. On Sunday, the Jewish Club at Wagner High School, which is the high school right next door to the JCC, had International Fair. The Jewish Club, for the first time, participated in the International Festival with a dance. They did get harassed going up to the stage. They did get the boos and Free Palestine screaming as they were dancing, but they held their heads high. Those 25 students on that stage, and they did a magnificent job of representing their club with respect and dignity. Walked down with the Israeli flag, down. So I would say there's a lot of hope. And I would say that it is absolutely JCC work to be done, engaging high school, junior high school students and their parents at this time. And we have an opportunity that we can't miss. And we need to capitalize on the fact that families want this connectivity and that students need this connectivity to ensure that our communities are strengthened, to be able to have the courage, even with the boos, to stand on that stage and be proud of the fact that they were waving that Israeli flag. So there's
Carrie, really, I want to just underscore or underline one of those words, right, which is around courage and confidence. And I think a lot of times we think about our role in building community, creating community, educating people, but really our ability to also give people the confidence to stand proudly, shoulders back, Kamsas and Stars of David's out is really, really important.
You literally took the words out of my mouth.
We do this sometimes.
I was going to say that part of our Hillel work was not just knowing people's names and stories, but helping them build Jewish self-confidence. And that's for allies also, to have an understanding and vernacular of what happens in the Israel space or the Jewish space. That is our work. I mean, I can't think of anything that is more deeply connected to our work as JCCs than to know our people and to build Jewish community by building Jewish self-confidence. It's what we do in our preschools, it's what we do. We talk about teens a lot over the last couple of days, more so than I expected to. And here, we're talking about work to do with teens. If they go into college with an understanding of the nuances around Israel, they don't have a deep understanding, but understand that there is nuance in the Israel conversation. But they go in with a Jewish self-confidence that they will find their people, and a Hillel or a Chabad or somewhere else to engage could be the place for them to do that. That is our work. It's our work with our parents to reassure them that there will be a place for them because we've built that Jewish community around us. And I look at this room of execs and our lay leaders here to say it is also our job, as Danielle articulated what we did here at Columbia and building relationships with the agencies in New York City for internships and for other things and the networks on campus. That is our job as convener in our JCCs also. Sometimes Federation holds the space of convener, but we convene the people every day. They don't convene the people every day. They convene the people so they can convene the dollars so they can allocate and more. I'm not minimizing the work of our federations, but we convene the people every day. 1.5 million people. That's a really big deal. That is our work.
So here I just want to elevate the work that the JCC Maccabi team, I know the committee met earlier today. This summer, we are going to be at the University of Pittsburgh for the first time with an official set of campus games, working in partnership with Hillel there. A lot of what Sam and I and the committee and Jeremy and the team, the professional and lay team have talked about is exactly this, that we're hoping that this becomes a model for also how we start to engage, because the JCC Maccabi teens will come in at much younger ages too. So we're not only talking about juniors and seniors. Importantly, we want to help them to identify that college campuses can be safe and welcoming spaces for Jews. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I'm saying that. So that work is also really important when we think about our work in camp, our work through JCC Maccabi, the engagement of our camp staff. There are so many places where we touch and convene teens to also be thinking about this work. Are there questions? I have like 1,000 questions that I can keep asking, but I just want to check in if there are questions from the audience.
My apologies. This is great. Sorry I wasn't earlier. It's great. No, I'm just leaving.
Bye, David. Thanks. Thank you, David.
Safe travel, David Kells.
Very good message.
Hi. Phyllis, maybe as you, for our panelists who may not know, if you could just introduce yourself and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Tabachnik from Chicago. And I think that as much as we see the impact that the Hillel model has on our staff, I think it's important that we can appreciate also, many of us have been very involved in the lay leader part of Hillel. I am here because not that I was a Northwestern student, because I was never involved when I was there, but as a former member of the board and past chair, I would say that it's like 20 years ago already that the engagement model really started in a way that was very different. And I think the part that the dotted I that maybe wasn't, the T that wasn't crossed, is that the reason we are all doing this, whether it's JCC or Hillel, is that the Jewish continuity piece, the idea that we want to help both young people, teens and students and families and children really develop a commitment to Jewish life. And whatever that commitment is I think why we all get as excited as we do about this. When I first understood the model at Hillel of engagement, and that was in the day when I felt, and I think I was probably a little wrong, but it felt like JCC engagement was how many people can we get in the door to put their kids in preschool and use the phys ed facilities that may be outdated. And how do we get from that to really appreciating what Jewish life can mean in a more vibrant Jewish community? I do have a question. Given what, like, I have not been as actively engaged on the campus part as I was then, and I have not spent as much time on campus since October 7th. But I'm interested from all of you in terms of how October 7th has both, it sounds horrible, but has both been good for engagement and bad for engagement, and just what the lessons are in that space. Thank you all.
Phyllis, thanks for reminding us that the ultimate goal is that all of this engagement work drives towards people making a deeper commitment to Jewish life and learning in Israel. That is actually why we do all of this work. So thank you for that reminder.
I think that's the Hillel mission statement.
That is the whole mission statement. So it's burned into my brain. So I think the question is a really important one. We're always thinking about how October 7th has impacted our engagement across our campuses. We saw what we call now, we saw a big surge right after October 7th, all of fall semester and into winter and spring semester of last year. We saw a huge increase of student engagement, right? Thousands and thousands of Jewish students were deeply interested in being in the Hillel spaces. Never before had we realized how important it was to have Hillel buildings on campus as we did last year. And for anybody who's been in the Hillel movement knows that 10 years ago we had a huge debate. Do we even need Hillel buildings anymore? Sometimes they sit empty and they're not, they're too big and they cost so much money and we have to replace the roof and they're all a headache, right? Last year we were like, oh my God, thank God we've got all of these buildings. So lots of students last year, and we're seeing a little bit of a dip this year, and the work is to say, like, okay, pull out those rosters. We logged all of that information last year. We know who all those students are. We know that they were craving something, that they needed community, they needed touch points, they needed adults to hand them the tissues, they needed to be walked, to the Hostage Forum rally that was happening across town, because that's where they wanted to be. So now our work is to make sure that we are reaching back out to those students and inviting them to build relationships with staff, inviting them to build relationships with others, and just, doing that really hard work of ensuring that we're reaching even more students. But we are seeing much, much more interest and engagement.
You want? I would say similar. it was like a wave. And now this semester, we're seeing a little bit of a dip. I would say because life is coming back in the minds of these students, right? The 1,000 clubs that they were involved with before, or the athletes who never walked into Hillel that now are walking into Hillel or back to their regular schedules. So I think the engagement model of Hillel, of the coffee dates, the one-on-ones, that's what's allowing those students to stay engaged, and we're seeing them come to a large event, maybe not to the meetings in the same way, but a large event that fits into their schedules. We're modifying schedules now for certain groups depending on their interests. If there's a group of students that really want to continue advocacy work, well, that group is meeting at a different time to meet their needs. So I think those one-on-one relationships are what's key to sustain the connectivity, even with the students who aren't showing up as frequently as they were, in the initial first stage post October 7th.
I also just want to quickly say that today, Birthright Israel registration opens for summer, and we are so hopeful, and we need all our partners on board to get a whole generation of students to Israel who maybe missed their 8th grade Jewish day school trip because of the pandemic. And then they missed it maybe last year because of October 7th, right? We're hoping that this is the summer. And so if there's any way that your JCCs can begin to spread the word about Birthright Israel registration for summer, and then we all are on the same wavelength as it relates to pushing students to Israel this coming summer, it would be amazing.
Our Israel trips also relaunch for the summer. I know Sara and Leah would be happy for us to talk about that as well. I just want to name one other piece that we saw because of what was happening on campus, which was staffing at our camps this summer was not a challenge. We heard that loud and clear, that students were so ready to go back to camp in a way that internship was off the table. It doesn't matter where I end up, if I go to law school, if I get the McKinsey, whatever, it didn't matter, that I need to be in a safe space where I can just be me as a Jew. So again, we talked about the surge and how people actively sought out Jewish life, and it was really beneficial for our camps this summer in that way. They were able to deliver them back to campus, a renewed renewed space of Jewish self-confidence, and a willingness to engage in the really hard, challenging pieces of their work last year. So I don't want to say that we haven't played a role in what happens on campus, because our camps certainly have.
I just wanted to add, since I'm sitting next to our talent expert over here, that these are the future professionals in this field, and paying attention to them and knowing their stories, who decided to go back to camp and had other options this summer. Hopefully they'll be sitting up here with Danielle in a number of years.
Amen, amen. And I will say not only our future professionals, but our future board members and community leaders. So it's really, it's vital.
I just want to double down on that, because Jen's heard me say it a million times before. Whenever our funders talk about the pipeline crisis, and they talk about the pipeline crisis, I always say, and Sam, I'm going to steal, this was Sam's language, Sam Cohen, that we actually have the solve for the pipeline crisis in the JCC movement. They're in our camps and our JCCs every day. Every future professional and lay leader in the Jewish world is coming through something that we are doing every day. So I want you to remember that when you say the talent expert, talent professional, whatever you want to call it, we actually are all the answer. So when you go back and you talk to your staffs or your Js or your fellow lay leaders about how you can help, it's recognizing that we have the solution.
Is there another question? Okay, maybe got answered as we were doing this. All right, so I'm gonna wrap us. I'm gonna maybe do this as a little bit of is there a question online at all? I saw, okay.
Actually,
Yes, there is.
they just came up.
It's like they heard me.
So we have a question from Howard Jacobson. The relationship between Hillel and Chabad at University of Kansas works well, as there are students who like both, and students learn from each of the groups. Is this a widespread situation?
Yes, it has to do with food often. That's not a joke, it's a real thing.
I'll speak from both. As a 14-year veteran Hillel professional and a JCC professional, you know one JCC, you know one. It is different, and every campus is different, and there is nuance on every campus. And I would say, as I really truly believed as a Hillel professional here and when I worked at the International Center, engaging in Jewish life is engaging in Jewish life at whatever point you enter it. There are some that do it beautifully, there are some that do it terribly, and everyone has room for improvement. So I think the answer is yes, that could exist, and it exists in many places. It could always be better. But Jewish students engaging in Jewish life should be our #1 priority at whatever touch point makes the most sense for them.
Yeah, as soon as we start competing with ourselves for who's grabbing whose attention, it's a losing battle. I say it all the time. So just a little bit of a lightning round. These are intended to be quick, but I'll do them together so that for each of you, I don't care which order, one thing that you think JCCs have to learn from Hillel, and one thing that you think Hillels have to learn from JCCs.
I'll try and go first. I think what we can learn from Hillel's goes back to where you started the conversation, that everybody in our community is our responsibility to try to get to know, whether they ever come through our doors or not. Doesn't mean if we live in metropolitan Chicago, we can meet every Jew, but that we should aspire to know everyone in our community. And what Hillel can learn from us, I think I'll twist that around a little bit to maybe suggest that there's a place where we're talking about parents before. And I know you're sitting in the seat, Jen, of sending a child off to college for the first time. What are we doing in the JCC world to prepare the parents, but also stay in touch with them? And something that didn't come up earlier, but is very close and near and dear to my heart, is I have a daughter on a campus that was not quite as tumultuous as Columbia, but pretty close. And the parent chat groups are horrendous. And if anybody in your JCC can be a calming influence to help parents just sit with their feelings and emotions, because they are causing their students more anxiety than a lot of things happening on the campus. If we could play a role in that space, that would be a gift to not only the student, but the entire family.
Utopia.
I echo what Sara said. I think the piece of JCC's deepening the relationship with individuals in the community is key. Not always worrying about the numbers of attendance, but the quality of program and what that program's intention is. Even if it's a small group, makes it just as meaningful as an event that has thousands present, and both are true. I think that from my perspective, the community relations piece that the JCC plays in Staten Island was not the same relationship that former Hillel directors have had on the College of Staten Island. And so I think Rachel has the ability to see that in action, be at the table with me to learn those strategies that are needed to do that community relations piece outside of the campus.
I'm just gonna add the one thing that I think Hillels can learn from JCC is, when I think of the JCC, I really do feel like you all have a lot of fun, right? It is like joyous. There's children running through your spaces, there's people celebrating, and it's multi-generational, and you do those things so well and so beautifully. And I think that Hillels are beginning to realize after October 7th that there's a responsibility to get back in the game of fun and joy and celebration and laughter and all of the amazing things that we have experienced as the Jewish people at different points in our histories. And so, collaboration on joy and fun, like really needed, really needed.
Hard to not end on that note.
Leonard said it earlier, this space in particular could learn about building operations in terms of our heat and air conditioning control. But I won't take it that lightly. Thank you, Leonard, I really appreciated it. I want to actually speak to what I think JCC Association can learn from Hillel International, because I sat in both places, I'm sitting in one of those places, which is, there was a real prioritization of talent and the people that do this work. As we have articulated, it's been said at every meeting I've been at since I started that talent is a top priority. Talent includes lay leadership. When I say chief people officer, it resonates a little bit more than chief talent, I think, when I say we are here for the lay leaders and the professionals that serve our movement and do this work. It wasn't just about prioritizing talent. It was actually using the data, Danielle talked about it earlier, measurable data. Understand the work and how it translates. It's not just butts and seats. Somebody said it earlier. That's not what we're measuring. Yes, it's important. You need to fill your camp roster. I understand that. You have a certain number of spaces in your classrooms. We have to fill our classrooms. That's not the engagement work we're talking about. We're talking about the strategy behind how you will continue to fill those seats. That I think is most important. So using the data to inform your strategy and then measure our success. So without those three components, it's wonderful to talk about all of this. It's a philosophy at that point. We can't put it into action.
Well, I want to thank all of you, to Carrie, Sara, Orit, and Danielle. It is wonderful to know you by name and by story, I will say. I hope you all found this conversation as helpful and important as I did. I think it's a beautiful way for us to sort of come into the final stretch. I'll call our chairman up in a moment to come into the final stretch of our meetings. These meetings have been about us being in relationship, and that's what this whole conversation was about. So I want to thank you, and please join me in thanking